year, the National Urban League releases its highly anticipated report on the state of Black America. The report has become the national touchstone for the social and economic status of African Americans and Hispanic communities. This year's report, One Nation Underemployed, Jobs Rebuild America, addresses the growing and underemployment crisis and how African Americans and other communities of color can recover from the losses of the Great Recession and forge a path to economic stability and upward mobility. Each year we ask the question, what is the state of Black America? Today our esteemed guest will answer that as it relates to the Equality Index, a statistical analysis of progress in the areas of economics, education, health, civic engagement, and social justice. This year's focus, American cities. Joining me, Dr. Valerie Rawlston Wilson, economist and vice president of research at the National Urban League Washington Bureau. Thanks so much for being with me, Valerie.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Now, the Equality Index. I've read the executive report and looking at it, and there's a lot to it, and there's a lot that can be gained from it. What is it really, and how are you all using it?
Well, we developed the Equality Index as a way to measure the work that the Urban League does. You know, central to our mission is economic empowerment. And we felt that in order to gauge whether or not we're getting closer to that goal, we really needed some hard numbers that quantified what's going on in terms of economic equality in this country. And knowing that there are a number of factors that influence economic equality, we include statistics on education, health, civic engagement, and social justice as well. And so we use that as a measure to figure out how close African Americans and whites are and how close Latinos and whites are in those areas. So 100% would be complete equality. As you know, the index is usually well below 100%, yes. The overall index, although there are specific areas that are a little closer.
Civic engagement you see obviously being higher than almost anything else.
Absolutely, and a lot of that has to do with high voter turnout, high voter participation, especially in the 2012 election. We saw that this year that index shot above 100%. For the black-white comparison because of that very fact.
Well, and the reality with that is year to year, you're not seeing huge shifts in any areas. As you looked in 2014, what were some of the glaring areas that either caused concern or caused a level of celebration?
Well, you know, as we just discussed, the civic engagement continues to show that, you know, African Americans are engaged in the civic process, are interested in what's going on in terms of elections and electing their officials, which I think is an important message for us to send.
Well, especially juxtaposed to the policies that we're seeing to block people from going to the polls.
Absolutely. And on the other side of things, the area where we continually see the least progress and the least equality is in economics. Economics and social justice are typically below at least 60% on that 100% scale.
Well, and with American cities being the focus, you all looked at 77 cities in all. Why 77? How did you choose 77? And what did that core group give you by way of aggregated data to be able to paint a picture of where we are and where you think we should be?
Well, we started with a set of 100 cities, and they're the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the country. It got whittled down to 77 based on population demographics. So we had to have a large enough African-American population within an area to calculate the statistics that we were interested in. And so that whittled down to 77 cities. And what we did with that is we provided a ranking based on unemployment outcomes. So we looked at unemployment equality between blacks and whites. We looked at just the unemployment rate for blacks, the unemployment rate for whites. And so we ranked them on equality. We ranked them on the lowest unemployment rate by each of those metro areas. And what came out of that was that we know that at the national level, unemployment equality is about 50%. So blacks are about twice as likely as whites to be unemployed. There were, I believe, 17 cities. Actually, I got to correct that. There were 23 cities that were above the national rate of 50% in terms of equality. But the interesting thing about those cities is that most of the cities where we see the greatest equality are not the cities where we see the lowest unemployment rates.
And I was getting ready to break that down, because if you're talking about equality, that doesn't mean employment is great. And so how does that play out, and what were some of the cities that really showed there's some reason to be optimistic?
Well, looking specifically and looking only at unemployment rates, there were 3 cities that were actually on both the lists for whites and for blacks when we looked at the top 10 cities for low unemployment rates. And those were Washington, D.C., Oklahoma City, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Now, the thread that sort of unites those cities is the fact that in all of those cities, the government is a major employer. So we find that that continually makes a difference in terms of employment outcomes.
But Oklahoma City also doesn't have the population numbers. The population is different.
The population's a little different, but Oklahoma City had a large enough African-American population for us to calculate those numbers and to rank it on our list.
But as somebody who lives in the Washington, D.C. area, I can tell you that those numbers, while they sound encouraging, when you're looking at the wealth gap that exists between the have and have-nots in Washington, D.C., what does that say, and how does that affect the overall number?
Well, I will say that the challenge always in looking at unemployment statistics, when you look at the official unemployment rate, it's always going to mask the people who are not actively looking for employment because they're not counted. They're not counted as being in the labor force. And so the unemployment rate you see is typically much lower than the actual rate of joblessness. So just to consider nationally, the average is now, I think, 6.7% unemployment rate. Underemployment, which is when we count people who are marginally attached, who may not have looked for a job in the past month, but are out of work and would desire a job, when we consider people who are working part-time for economic reasons, meaning that they would prefer a full-time job, but they took a part-time because that's what was available. When we consider all of those people, that rate jumps from 6.7%, which is the official unemployment rate, to about 13%. So it's about double. And so the same thing, I think, is what we would see in a city like Washington, D.C. I mean, that's only the people who are actively in the labor force. If we were to expand that, we would see a much larger rate of joblessness in the city.
As you looked at the categories that help you determine these numbers, one of them was social justice. And so what does that social justice number mean? How are you measuring that, and how does that play into the broader index?
Well, the biggest factor that plays into the social justice index is incarceration rates. We probably have the most data looking at rates of incarceration for both by gender as well as different age groups. And so that is really what's driving that difference there. And as we know, across the country, in cities across the country, we also had incarceration rates available for our metro areas that were featured this year. And across the board, you see incarceration rates for African Americans that are much higher than they are for their white counterparts, and even much higher than they are for their Hispanic counterparts.
Well, and the interesting thing for me is, and I think we deal with this almost every year, and it was great to be able to sit with Mark Morial to talk a little bit about some of the Urban League's broader issues. But even when you look at this statistically, if I'm a parent sitting at home thinking about my child, if I am at home thinking about how I'm getting a job myself, how am I using these numbers? How do I look at them if I take the time to read the report? And then what do I do next as a result of these?
Well, I think the numbers really provide people with the facts and the data that they need to make the point that's very real to them already. I don't think it's a matter of...
But do people really need those numbers? Like if I'm looking at cities all over the country, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, I live in Baltimore, I'm in the D.C. area, I don't have to read you all's report to be able to see how serious the conditions are. The report highlights some very specific areas for us, right?
Right.
And so how do those specific areas give us a better picture, maybe help us see things that we don't actually see?
Well, I think it does that, but also I think that when you are engaged in advocacy, when we want to encourage people to go to their elected officials and to make clear to them what it is that they need in their communities, it's the facts that count. It's the data that actually pushes people and convinces people that something needs to be done, because those things are indisputable. You know, personal stories are important as well. They're very compelling. But in order to really drive the point home and to make a case that can't be argued and disputed, the data is essential to that. And I think that what we provide in the Equality Index helps people to make that case. And this year, with providing data at the metro level, I think we're empowering people even at an even greater level in their local area to be able to talk about what's going on.
Well, and to that point, I know that within the report there are 4 cities that you're highlighting in particular where you've gotten comments from their mayors. to give a little bit about some of the projects they're working on. How is this data being shared through partnerships with local politicians, with state legislatures? Because that's really what you're talking about.
Right.
The power is of this relationship and this data. Can you talk a little bit about how that's happening and any places where it may be turning the needle to help develop policy?
Sure. Well, this year we decided to feature actually a total of 26 cities. And what I mean by feature is that in addition to those rankings on unemployment and income, for those 26 cities, we provide, I believe it's a total of about 26 key statistics that are a part of the national data. So in addition to unemployment and income, we also provide information on educational attainment. There's also data on poverty. There's also the social justice data that's available for those cities as well. And I think the way that will be most useful, we haven't, in releasing the book, they will become more public and more
Absolutely.
people will have access to it. But already we've seen that our local affiliates across the country, they're present in 36 states and the District of Columbia, are very interested in getting the data for their area so that they can be more effective in the work that they do, not only in servicing the community and the population around them, but also in being advocates for those people and empowering them to be advocates for themselves as well. So I think
that's important.
moves us
It's
really in the right direction.
And the reality too is so few of us have the resources, so few folks on the ground have resources for this kind of data. You all have been doing this for 38 years now. The report itself and the indexes have come as a result of that. How are you beginning to use this to forecast? And to forecast areas where additional mobilization should take place. How is some of this information helping you forecast to do proactive work?
Well, I think we've been building constantly over the past 10 years that we've been doing the index. And the fact that we have 10 years of data now gives us the opportunity to begin to look back over that and to see the kinds of trends that we've seen develop and to frame that within the policy environment and to be able to see what effect different policies have had on these outcomes. And so I think that just the fact that we've accumulated 10 years worth of equality index data. Last year we did the 50-year retrospective. That gave us an opportunity to look over a longer horizon. And that's how forecasting is done. You predict the future based on what you've seen in the past.
Absolutely.
And so, the position that we're in now and now with expanding the index even more to include the metro areas, that gives us greater capacity to begin to predict and to forecast and to really be proactive in the work that we do and not wait for.
And it's essential, right? Because data is not sexy, but it's powerful.
Right.
And so we really appreciate the fact that you all continue to do this work and that you're breaking it down for folks to be able to understand it. Thanks to you so much for joining me.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Please share this web series with your social media friends and followers, and let's continue this solutions session using #JobsForAll. Now get involved, everybody. The State of Black America web series has been presented by AT&T. Thank you, AT&T, for your continued support of the National Urban League. We also want to thank Comcast for their production support of the State of Black America web series. Together, we're empowering communities and changing lives. You can always follow me on Twitter at Jeff's Nation. And for more information on the State of Black America, please purchase the book and visit the National Urban League at NUL.org.